here to talk with Andrew Keys. He's one of the co-founders or earliest members of ConsenSys, which is big in the Ethereum community. So we're going to talk this morning about Ethereum and what is going on there on that blockchain. So I thought what I would do is give just a brief kind of history of Ethereum and how Andrew fits in, and then we'll go from there.
Sure.
So Ethereum was introduced to the world in 2013 by Vitalik Buterin, who created it. In 2014, there was a crowd sale. 2015, Ethereum launched on the mainnet. 2016, there was the DAO attack where $55 million was stolen. A couple months later, there was a hard fork where, unbeknownst to everybody, the Ethereum Classic chain was created and the hard fork went with Ethereum. Then 2017 was kind of the ICO craze. You guys probably remember that when everything was going through the roof. 2018 was kind of the bursting of the bubble, a lot of building going on behind the scenes, which is continuing today. Now, Andrew, you met Joe Lubin in 2014 at the first Ethereum meetup in New York City. That was a couple weeks before the crowd sale. You were super into Ethereum from the get-go and joined ConsenSys, I think, officially in early 2015.
Sure.
So why don't you just tell us, kind of give us an update and the roadmap that you see at this point?
So I think it's worth telling a little bit of kind of that early story. My best computer science was in college, and it's been technically downhill since. But I understood the implications of legacy database architecture and essentially the payment systems. Prior to ConsenSys, I built an electronic medical records and insurance payments platform, and I just saw how bad our legacy systems worked between banks and insurance carriers, and this was at the same time that Bitcoin happened. And the double spend was a breakthrough in computer science, solving the problem of the double spend. If I send Matt an email, I can carbon copy that email to somebody else, but if I send Matt money, I obviously don't want to be able to carbon copy that money. And that advancement in cryptography was really a breakthrough, and that was, in my opinion, what Satoshi really invented. But Alice could only send Bob value. And I thought, that's great, but we can't have business logic that if X happens, then Alice sends Bob else failed payment. You know, these if-then-else statements that we now know to be smart contracts. And I was lucky enough to meet Joe Lubin, one of the founders of the Ethereum protocol, at the first ever Ethereum meetup in New York City. And he essentially painted a picture of the ability to have a decentralized World Wide Web and what those implications on society could be. And I'll never forget him telling me the story of double entry accounting. And basically, if I send $1 to Matt, there's the debit for the dollar in my books, there's the credit in Matt's books for the dollar, and I can be disingenuous and change that to 99 cents, and Matt could make a mistake and change his from $1 to $1.50. And this concept is how Earth works. Planet Earth runs on the concept of double entry accounting. It was created in the 1600s by a monk, and we've seen changes to the debits and the credits. And now Joe explained to me the introduction of this third party, this immutable ledger, this watermarking, this handshake, this receipt, that no matter what, that imprint of that transaction will always be there. And basically what Joe painted to me was the automation of the concept of audit. So hopefully no one from Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, or Ernst & Young are in the room, but basically that simple example, and there's a lot of nuance to that, and I purposely oversimplify it, that concept where you could automate something that's so prevalent in the world opened my eyes to what could happen.
You're not just automating it, you're creating that third layer that it makes it so that I can't mess with it and you can't mess with it.
Right, tamper resistant.
Yeah, the thing that appeals to me about Ethereum and what kind of made me take an interest in it in my reporting is you think about, it's a contract. Think about any sort of contract we have, you can now digitize it and put it on a blockchain. And so it could be a lawyer's agreement, it could be, a payment agreement. And I find that just so fascinating.
And the vantage that most people come to blockchain with is the payment rail vantage. Alice pays Bob money. We're all watching CNBC. Did Bitcoin go up? Did Bitcoin go down? But the real magic is in these agreements, these contracts that Matt just referenced. And really, when we think about society, when we think about businesses, they're really just a nexus of contracts. You've got a business that has employment agreements, accounts receivable agreements, service level agreements. And basically, if you can automate these aspects of how society works, you can create this essentially trustless society. So when I am explaining this, I think there are really three considerations for the non-computer scientists that what this is going to bring. And first and foremost, this is literally the substrate of the next generation of the internet. And if there are three core takeaways, one would be the digitization of assets. All assets. Milk, electrons from a solar panel, fiat, apples, a Beyonce concert ticket, American Express point, a stock, bond, derivative, an insurance policy, our identity, not just some type of token that acts as a software license that in this kind of ICO boom and bubble that we saw last year. All assets are going to be natively digital. And with that, we can embed arbitrarily complex business logic. So that means that we can have the ability to create things like real-time employment agreements where somebody can get paid by the minute or by the second. We can create the ability for a solar panel to distribute electrons to 1,000 different households in real time. We can create programmatically programmable food stamps that would restrict the purchase of sugar or cigarettes, for example. So basically, the digitization and the embedding of arbitrarily complex logic in our assets. So the next is these notions of smart contracts. It's probably not the best wording, but basically, our agreements are going from Microsoft Word documents to if-then-else statements. And we can embed those digital assets in those if-then-else statements. And then if there is a breach of that contract, we can essentially revoke those digital assets in real time. So breach of contract could be much simpler. And then the last one is the notion of self-sovereign digital identity. There will be the Matt browser. Matt's going to log in rather than Facebook, Amazon, eBay, Uber, Gmail, et al. He's going to log into his personal browser with some type of biometric. It's going to have his identity. It's going to have a canonical Matt Leising identity. Then it'll be his work identity, maybe his gamer identity, maybe a dark identity. And each one of those could have different types of reputational attributes. If we take 1,000 Ubers and we get 5 stars in them, if we probably rent an Airbnb, we'd probably be a good resident. But right now, with those siloed systems, that reputation isn't portable. In the future, you're going to have this canonical persona, and you'll be able to show that reputation and port it, and it'll create this rich reputation by which we're going to have peer-to-peer transactions.
All right, but let's take a step back for a second and go back to the digitization of assets. Okay. Why do we want to do that? What is that going to help us achieve in our day-to-day life?
I think it will thaw liquidity, most importantly. I think that what
liquidity for milk.
The milk example is a great example. So everyone knows Got Milk with the mustaches. So basically, what they're doing is they're embedding processes in the milk transportation devices to track the provenance of the asset. So the chain of custody, the authenticity, and basically if the milk goes bad. So they have a tamper-resistant refrigerator, and basically if the milk is at over a certain temperature, it'll ping a blockchain to say that this is not good. And so in the milk example, that's, I think, the advantage of having this tamper-resistant provenance chain of the asset.
Okay, and that is a big issue. I think Walmart is doing some work with tracking ingredients, and sort of farmers are working on. So that's supply chain. Would you put that into the supply chain bucket?
Yes, I put that in the supply chain bucket. But you could also, so yes, there's the tracking of the asset that it is indeed real, but you can also add letters of credit to it. So you've got creator of the asset, wholesaler of the asset, retailer of the asset, purchaser of the asset. You can now create, based upon whose fiduciary ownership of the asset is in the supply chain, an automation of letters of credit. So if it goes from place A to place B, there's typically maybe a net 90 accounts receivable. You can expedite that and follow that liquidity. So not only are you proving that the asset is indeed composed of the ingredients that it's supposed to be of, and it's tamper-proof, but now you're actually following the liquidity within the supply chain.
Okay. And then to the self-sovereign identity, that seems like a tricky one to me, because if we're talking about a decentralized world, a peer-to-peer world, how am I going to gain reputation from a bunch of individuals? What we have now are centralized authorities that stand in, credit bureau, my employer, the government. Like, how do you go from that? And you need all of those things to buy into this as well.
So there will be essentially two aspects of it: attributes and attestations. And it's going to depend upon the transaction. So if we're doing an Airbnb or Uber type thing, it's a much different type of transaction for potentially getting a mortgage for a house. An attestation will be someone's opinion of you, how you act in society. An attribute is an indisputable fact, something like a blood type. And I think, to your point, the more sophisticated the transaction is, or maybe the more capital intensive it is, the more we will rely on those same types of authorities. So you could potentially attach your Experian credit report to that self-sovereign digital identity and then apply for the mortgage the same way. Versus something like renting a room, you're going to see the same type of user experience as an Airbnb, but it could happen in a peer-to-peer fashion. And it really only works in a peer-to-peer fashion if you do have kind of rich reputation, because that's what Airbnb, one of the main things Airbnb is providing.
Right, and I think throughout that entire example, I'm in charge of what I'm doing. I'm choosing to do this or choosing to not do this, which we don't have a lot of choice right in this. Do you agree?
And most of the time we are the product.
Right. All right, so I've been covering this since about 2015. Like, show me something that I can touch. I want to use Ethereum right now.
Yep.
Where is this?
So Matt was busting my chops yesterday and last week. He said that I told him that we were in the first inning 2 years ago, and where are we now? So if it was 2 years ago, it's the first inning. I still think we're in the first inning.
He said that, I was going to punch you in the face.
Yeah. So he said exactly.
I'm not going to do that.
So he's too kind. So I still think we are in super early days. Blockchain in 2019, in my opinion, is probably the lazy man's analogy is internet in 1994. So we're still pre-dial-up. The main catalysts forward at the protocol layer, first and foremost, in my opinion, are standards. For you technology historians, Java became the most proliferated language on Earth. Really when it became J2EE, Java 2 Enterprise Editions, when it had clean web APIs and clean database APIs. And so an engineer in Mumbai or Paris or LA would use the same standards. We're starting to see those standards proliferate. Probably at the Crypto Investment Summit, the most popular standard was the ERC20 token standard. So that basically, whether you were creating a token for a bar of gold, a can of milk, a barrel of oil, they would all use the same type of standard so they could all fit into the standard wallets. So that's one thing. Next is upgrading scalability. So there's a very specific scalability roadmap to Ethereum. A few core components of that is transitioning from proof of work to proof of stake, where we can have essentially digitized consensus formation algorithms rather than requiring hardware. Employing state channels. So if I took everyone to a restaurant and handed the bartender my card and I ordered a Sola Shirley Temple, a hamburger, a dessert, and another Shirley Temple, each of those transactions for all of us can get batched. So really you open the tab on chain, and then you have thousands of microtransactions, and then you can close them on chain. And so basically those 1,000 microtransactions of each order is batched into that state channel. And then lastly is a technology called sharding, where essentially shards of the blockchain have to form consensus rather than the entire blockchain having to form consensus. That, and then last but not least is the application layer. Gentle reminder, from 96 to 06, 85% of .coms went to zero. There will be a similar trajectory, if not worse. We saw kind of the first, I would say, attempt at early applications. We're seeing them now. They will get much more sophisticated. And to your question, sorry for the long-winded response, we're starting to see what I would say is the early edge cases of decentralized finance working. So first and foremost, the notion, whether there is a lot of regulatory gray area, the token launch bubble of last year is the future of capital formation. Rather than it being a specific investment bank or a bunch of bros in Sandhill Road that are essentially gatekeepers to venture capital, you created this global platform that you could have an immediate receipt of money sent to a wallet. And if you saw a token sale in real time, you could see 1,000 wallets sending money to a singular address. If you were to do that with legacy database systems and a team of accountants and a team of attorneys and the microtransactionality of that, it would be very cumbersome. So I think that's first and foremost one.
Is that going to be SEC compliant?
I mean, so I think it's going to evolve. I mean, I think that you're going to see the issuance of security tokens, and that's already happening. You're also going to see more consumer utility tokens. I think that you're seeing the birth of a new asset class. Ether, in my opinion, is like a digital oil that you need to run these applications. I think there are other layers in that stack of this new digital asset class, like decentralized storage, the interplanetary file system that has the ability to have these assets. Rather than paying Dropbox, you can pay 1/100th of a Dropbox fee and have it much more secure, decentralized, not on their servers, and basically irrevocable. There was a point where Egypt shut down essentially HTTP, and they were able to regenerate the internet on IPFS without this centralized government tampering.
Yeah, the analogy I like is you're talking about all these things that are being done to the Ethereum network. It's like a 747 that is being repaired in mid-flight because as you're doing all these things, the network is continuing to operate. Another thing I was interested to learn the other day was the Central Bank of France has been using blockchain for its payment systems internally, and so central banks around the world are starting to experiment and adopt this as well.
So the first central bank that did any of this, I actually was lucky enough to lead, which was the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And what they did with ConsenSys and JP Morgan was essentially real-time gross settlement of the Singaporean dollar. So there were 11 institutional banks, HSBC, Goldman, Standard Chartered, Citi, et al. And the central bank literally sat in the middle. And they would net if Citibank sent $1,000 to Goldman, it would literally go through this central intermediary. And then basically what we did was we created a node where there was a central bank regulatory node on this environment. They were essentially taken out of the middle, but they were able to watch and monitor, but they didn't have to serve that function. And what we did was we digitized the omnibus accounts. And so if they had $100 in their omnibus account, they would get 100 digital dollars on a permission version of Ethereum, and they would move these digital tokens, and the central bank would get the example I gave of the triple entry accounting. They would own that third party, the third ledger, and basically what it did was it reduced the trade settlement latency from T+2, 2 days clearing and settlement, to T+0. So you had literally real-time gross settlement. And what that does in thawing interbank payments, it just creates a much faster velocity, and you're seeing that in the South Africa.
Right, and the reason that matters is a bank has to set aside money, its own money, while a transaction is waiting to clear. So you take that 2 days away, now a bank has much more capital to use for more efficient ways for lending or for buying or selling, whatever it is it's doing in the market. The other thing that strikes me as the bad cop, I guess, up here is, you're talking about a refrigerator.
Keeping us honest.
You're talking about a refrigerator telling me that I can't drink my milk because it's gone above a certain temperature. That's the Internet of Things that, to me, I don't know where the data, the speed and the database and everything, where is that housed, and how do you think about the challenges there if you're talking about getting to this peer-to-peer internet, the infrastructure? I don't know that is it being built? Are we close?
I mean, absolutely, and it's going to depend. I can't answer that broadly. It'll be on a case-by-case basis, but suffice to say that the internet that we use now was created in the 1970s to trade academic research papers, and the amount of appliances and just actors that are logging onto this legacy internet infrastructure that isn't cryptographically secured is just increasing exponentially every year. So depending upon the asset and the use case, some will still silo and store the data in their own server farm, and then there will probably be some type of cryptographic hash that'll be anchored on these global trust settlement layers, or some of them could be stored in a decentralized fashion in something like IPFS or Ethereum.
Okay. I think another sort of, it's not theoretical, but an interesting world that you're talking about in a peer-to-peer internet is if I'm in control of where I'm browsing or my Facebook use or my Twitter use, you might not have the ability of huge data aggregators being able to now use artificial intelligence to predict the political mood of a country and potentially influence an election and maybe sow division in an electorate like we've seen with Russia and the U.S. elections here. So that's a real world issue that we're facing now, that the legacy firms here that are centralized and have that really incredibly powerful information don't seem very concerned about. Is that
agree 100%.
too Robin Hood?
I think that's completely right. And then I'd add the concept of, if we're going to divert our attention from our work, our loved ones, and we're going to focus it on advertisements in, let's say, in browsing Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg is extracting that value. And I think the future of this, if you could take something like a social media of tomorrow, is the same type of user experience, and it's going to take a long time. Good software, Microsoft Office took 10 years to build, to get it hardened. We're really in year 2, year 3 of this stuff. So it's not going to happen tomorrow, but there will be a Facebook of tomorrow where if you divert your eyes to advertisements, maybe you get paid $1 a day, and you have the same type of user experience, and instead of Facebook extracting that value, you could get paid. That's where I see this behavioral economic nudging. And the only way really that you're going to see the incumbents that already have a tremendous user base potentially get disrupted.
I think to make that transition, it should be seamless, and a lot of people don't even want to know that it's doing in the back kind of office.
99% don't care.
Right.
And don't recognize it, and they just want to smooth you their.
But I think another issue for me is the user experience is really bad right now, and it's difficult. It's easy to make mistakes.
Yep.
What are you gonna see that makes you like? What should we be looking for? That okay, when you can do this, or now like give us a roadmap if you can.
So I think that we probably shouldn't be paying attention to blockchain yet. And the only reason we did is because it also now embeds money and assets, and we saw that with this early boom and bust, and I think there'll be 5, 6 more of them. But to your point, the user experience of these have to be increased dramatically. So you're going to have scalability. You're going to have kind of best practices in creating apps so they can compete with typical legacy apps like your Facebook, Twitters, etc. And you're going to have to figure out, or we as a community are going to have to figure out things like fat finger mistakes. There's going to have to be something where you're going to have clauses in the smart contracts to unwind something. And that's just a decade of software engineering that has to happen.
And again, that gets into the sticky issue of governance in a decentralized environment, which has been, we saw that in the Bitcoin world over SegWit, and we're seeing it in the Ethereum world where you're moving to proof of stake. Vlad Zamfir has been working for years on this idea of like what is consensus. It's very tricky.
So my hope is that we can get the protocol layer through proof of stake and sharding in a concept of rough consensus, and literally abstract governance to the application layer. That would be my hope for how this works.
So the app I'm using, if there are changes to be made, the users of that app would have some stake in it and make a vote on it,
or the developers of the app. So really what this should be, if it's going to be a substrate for how the global economy agrees with each other, it's going to have to be anti-fragile and get really boring really quick. Just like you don't care when you use Expedia if you're using an Oracle or an SAP database in the background. You don't know that. You just buy your plane ticket. Mm-hmm. And it's going to have to get abstracted to that point.
Okay. We just got a few seconds left, but somebody made an interesting point to me recently. It was, paper money was great when we had sort of a regionalized economy, when it was maybe the southeast of the United States or the eastern seaboard. We're in a global economy now. We need a global sort of digital store of value. Do you think Bitcoin fits that bill? Does Ethereum, Ether fit that bill? Is there something else coming, like a digital US dollar? Or what, just real quick, what do you think that global...
I feel as though I'm not the right person to answer this, because I think that the concept of store and transmission of value was the opening act and the gateway drug into what I think is much more sophisticated, which is the digitization of how society agrees with each other. And I think that basically Alice sending Bob value peer-to-peer will pale in comparison to the types of programmability that we can construct society on with these natively digital agreements.
All right.
I'm more of an agreements guy than a money guy.
I'm going to agree with you on that. And we're going to leave it on that high-minded topic or note. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a great conference.
Thank you.